sweetheart's name was sweetheart's name. Do you remember Viking? It was about you and me with a big skull where his heart should have been. Inside his chest, inside his chest.
All right, gang. Stop yelling. Here's something that has never been said, and that is, I'm tired of this whole kegging thing. I'm going to go back to bottle conditioning all my beers. Who says that?
I've never said that.
I'm not saying no one ever does both or whatever, but I have never heard that. Once you go to kegging, usually that's it. The reason is many reasons. So this is going to be just kind of a review for some people. We did this demonstration 2 years ago, and it is by far the most popular one that I get asked to repeat all the time. So if you've seen it before, you might learn something, maybe not. So what you will need, if you're a first-time kegging person, this is called a Corny keg, Cornelius keg, because if you read on here somewhere it says made by the Cornelius company. So when someone says Corny keg, this is 5 gallons, Corny keg. You will need one of these. There's a couple different kinds. There's a ball lock and a pin lock are the two most common kinds. Most people use ball lock, but they're since they don't make these anymore, by the way, so they become increasingly rare. I'll go through the differences, but ball lock, and then there's pin lock, which somebody had a pin lock, this kind right here, but basically it's just how the fittings adapt to on here. You generally want to keep the same kind of kegs, meaning you have all ball lock or all pin lock. So sometimes you see a smoking deal, you're like, oh my gosh, 20 bucks for kegs. I'm going to buy a bunch. And you realize they're all pin lock, and you've got a bunch of ball lock connections. Ask me how I know. Bulk bought a bunch of these things. There's nothing wrong with the pin locks, it's just, you kind of want to do one or the other. You'll also need a way to pressurize your tanks, which is your CO2 and regulator. So the device that allows you to control the pressure that goes into that. Again, we'll kind of go into more detail on this later. You will also need, the fun part, is a way to dispense your beer. If you've got your beer in here, you've carbonated it, you need to dispense it. There's a couple different ways. This is by far the most common. It's just called a picnic tap or a cobra tap. It snaps on here, and you dispense your beer. That's smart. Ta-da! And let's see, what else will you need? Well, oh, and then you'll need some tools. You can also use this as a cheap way to bottle your beers. See that little vacuum can? Look at this. Voila. This is how I bottled for like the first 3 years because I was against the beer gun. And Chris Jennings at Brew Brothers showed me this little trick. And that's how I bottled my beers. And, just throw that dude in there like that. Fill it up, cap it.
So after you carbonate it in your keg, then you bottle?
Yes. Yes, so the beer in here is completely carbonated, ready to drink either right out of the tap, right out of the jockey box, or put it in a bottle and cap it, and you're ready to go. Send it to competitions and win. You'll also need some tools. Let's break down one of these kegs here real quick.
How about this fancy keg
Don't lose it.
So, to begin with, these little kegs, this one is full of sanitizer, this one is not. So I'm going to open this guy. Little pressure relief valve there on top. This little swing guy up here. And onto that gasket so it doesn't fall down inside. So these little posts, they got to come off for cleaning. Okay, they're just threaded on there. There's a couple of different ways to get them off. I learned just by going through my garage in the early days, a 23 millimeter box end will fit both sides. So it's a little loose, but it works. I did it that way for years. Now it will fit most of them. Some of them, like this, they change them up on you way too small. So 23 millimeter will get you a long ways. The next thing, past President Mark Eaton showed me this, is a 11/16 by 7/8 inch. You have to buy, you won't just find them in the store, but they do sell them, Craftsman. This one will work on the small and the large. So right when he showed me this, and I go, oh, I can get rid of this thing. I can get this. I won a couple competitions at Slurp and Burp, in which I won this Gerber tool, which is very similar to this. Very similar. So it's got both sizes there, and a little wrench which fits this little fitting. Sometimes you'll need to take that apart. So that goes on right there, and it's a bottle opener. So one of these tools, like they'd already talked about, very handy. Just get one. Don't bother going to buy one of these. Just get one of these. Okay. So let's take this dude apart real quick. Yes. These posts are not the same. In other words, one is for gas only, one is for liquid only. Gas in, liquid out. The little formation of those ridges on there are different between the two. They look identical. They are not. You will mess up sometimes. I've done it myself. Where you do this, you'll say, okay, I need to dispense some beer, but I'm going to hook it up, and you put it on the wrong one, on the gas. So see what happens here. If I try to push it on, you go, this is really tight. Well, you can shove it on there and it'll go on, but then it's a bear to get back off. So they are different from each other. How you can tell on your fittings, one is black, one is gray. Gray is gas, G, gray, gas. It's black, B, beer. So that's kind of how you tell that.
I know why they changed it.
So because you wouldn't want to inadvertently do that the wrong way. Pressurize the wrong side when these were originally made for Pepsi and Coke. So, if you hooked them up backwards, well then you're not going to be able to dispense it.
They tend to say in and out.
Yeah, usually somewhere they're stamped. This one didn't, and so I had to write it in a Sharpie, and it's almost worn off. But yes, most of the time they do say something somewhere on there. They could have made them, to me, they could have made them way different. So you can't force it on there, but either way. Okay, so let's get this dude apart. So yeah, these just thread off. The other thing you'll start doing is you'll see all the O-rings that are involved in this. You've got a big old O-ring here on the lid. Be replaced every now and then. You take this post out here. This is the gas post, so in other words, gas just goes in. There's an O-ring there. There's an O-ring seal up here for the fitting, and then inside's a little poppet. There's a bunch of O-rings in there. So over time, you may have to replace those, or at least take these apart and clean them all. These are all places that bacteria and nasties can hide and infect your beer. So after every beer, I know a lot of you don't, but you should take it apart and clean everything, sanitize it, and put it back together. So if you're thinking about making the jump to kegging, once you buy your first keg, just mess with it, take it apart so that you understand, how things are working in there. This one is the beer outline.
Question, Jason.
Take it apart.
Are the gaskets readily available?
Yes. Enough at Steinbert's. Steinbert's will have everything you need here except the cap wrench right there. So this is the beer outline. Obviously, it's the dip tube that goes clear down to the bottom. So you're pressurizing the top, and then the beer comes up here and gets served out. We'll talk more about that part. So keep these things clean and sanitized. That's very key, just like anything in brewing, obviously. So there you have that part of it. Just the simple apparatus. Oh yeah, let's do gas. So for gas, let that go here like that. Drop your water. Put some pressure on this dude. So this is now pressurized in here. So any questions on just this basic part that I've done? We're going to go more into depth of moving liquids around and stuff.
Jason, when you initially opened that keg up, you had to release some pressure. Was there any reason why you had that pressurized?
I do, actually. When I clean and sanitize my kegs, that's an awesome question. When I clean and sanitize my kegs, and I know that they're ready to have beer put in it, I actually put a piece of tape on it that says ready. So what that means is, okay, it is clean, it is sanitized, and it is pressurized. Okay, so it is ready. That thing can sit there for 6 months. And I know if I go up to it and I can hear gas coming out, it's holding pressure and it's ready to go. I don't have to clean anything else. So at any given time, I can have a stash of these ready kegs. I didn't bring it, but they also make a gauge that you can snap onto the post, and it'll tell you the pressure. So I pressurize them at 20 pounds. If I come back in a week and I hit it, it's still at 20, then I know all my seals are good. If there's no pressure or it's losing, I better look into those seals before I put some beer in it, because you'll end up either blowing beer out or you'll just slowly leak CO2 out, and you'll lose all your CO2 and won't be able to dispense your beer. I just use the keg lube. I don't use a lot of it, really. The only gasket is the big O-ring. It seems to get stuck sometimes. Okay, so these are the basics of what you need. Oh, and you need a refrigerator big enough to hold this in. Believe it or not, I never thought about that when I first got set up. I'm like, this is awesome. I got all this stuff going. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I got to cool this down. Well, start moving the shelves in your fridge and getting this in there and whatever. 2 refrigerators in my garage later, I've got a dedicated spot. So that's the basics. Now for cleaning, you will need some other specialized stuff. You want little brushes and stuff that will clean out those tubes. They sell all that stuff here at Steinbart's. So now we're going to get into actually using the keg and how I clean and sanitize. So oxygen is our enemy, right, against beer after fermentation. So inside this is oxygen. I just opened it up, right? You saw me open it, so there's oxygen in there. So when I go to rack this beer, let's say I have a beer I just made, I got my siphon tube, I'm going to put it into here via gravity. I open that dude up. Now it's sanitized, I know that, but it's going to be exposed to oxygen the whole time that thing is filling up. That's not the end of the world, right? How long does that take to fill up? So it's nothing to freak out about. But if you can limit that exposure by filling this with CO2, and now the beer goes in the bottom, and so it's not touching oxygen until it gets clear up to the top, you've just eliminated, what, 5 minutes, however long it takes, worth of exposure. And it's so easy to do. And again, I learned this right after I did this demonstration last year. I used to just take this gas line, put it in here, and pressurize it, bleed out the excess like this. See, we pressurized it, let that out, the oxygen's in there, gets replaced by CO2. Do that a few times. Well, if you're doing that with 5 gallons, that's a lot of volume that you're doing. Well, if you're cleaning or sanitizing multiple kegs, then this is what you do. So this keg is clean, and I filled it with sanitizer. It's got 5 gallons of sanitizer, star sand, clear up to the top. I pressurized it with CO2. You get the next little jumper. This is called a jumper. Just homemade. Notice it's both beer lines. It's not a gas and a beer. So what that means is it's going to go from the bottom to the top. Ooh, that's going to feed that. Real quick, you got 2 kegs. Let's do this. You got your beer line. See, this is your dip tube down here. Here's your jumper. So in other words, we're going to push air or CO2 into here to force that star sand out this beer line, just like you would beer, right? It's going to go in there. It's going to come down here and go in there. Okay, and so then this is going to transfer from there to there. As this empties, it's being filled with CO2. Right? So by the time it gets empty, it's got all CO2. Much easier and much more efficient use of your CO2 to do that. And so you just go like this. Put this on out. Make sure you see which one's which here. This is the beer. That. Watch it start moving. You can't see, but this liquid is now transferring
Your lid have to be
into there.
open to release the pressure?
Eventually you will, yeah, because this is going to build up pressure.
Yeah.
As this goes in here. This is going to compress.
Okay.
So you wait a little bit and
And then release.
hear that. Yeah.
Now you're gonna empty that, when I watch you put the beer in it, rack the beer in and then after that, right?
Correct.
Really have, maybe some residue of sanitizer in there, and really shake out.
There might be a little bit in the bottom, depending on how I deal with that. A little bit of sanitizer is not the end of the world, but you know, the less the better. I open that dude up, and then quickly turn it upside down, let that dump out, and flip it back again. That's it. Just a little bit. Yep. So I'm going to make sure this is going, so it's going the whole time I'm tossing. That's on and that's on. Okay, so now this is transferring. You can't see it, but it's transferring, going right through there. Oh yeah, see, that's getting heavy. Okay. So this jumper you use for all kinds of things, not just the sanitizing. So when this thing is empty, now it's 100% ready. I put my little green tape that says ready on it, and it's ready to go. Now this one obviously is full of sanitizer. So depending on how many kegs you have, you could keep doing this on down the line. And you're reusing that same sanitizer, so you're not mixing up a whole batch. And it's getting into all your dip tubes and all that stuff, so it's getting everything taken care of. This jumper, something else you can use it for, is doing the same thing, just transferring one beer from one keg to the next. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, sometimes you get a lot of sediment in the bottom of these things, right? Your beer settles over time, you've racked it once or twice, you're still going to get a yeast cake in the bottom. I've noticed every time I bring a beer here to serve, as I drive from Hillsboro, it shakes the heck out of that thing. And so it's always cloudy. And so you let it sit, let that yeast cake go to the bottom. Your first little pour out of this might have a little bit of yeast in it, but the rest is in a cake in the bottom. Now, if your keg is just sitting there the whole time, that's no problem. But if you move it around like I do, and most people who have kegs, the reason they have kegs is they want to take them places. You shake them up and all that yeast gets back into suspension. So what you do is, once you've lagered it or cold crashed it long enough and you know it's clear like you want, you pull off just a little bit of that cloudy beer out of the bottom, and then it'll be clear. And so you rack it from one to the next, and you'll leave that yeast cake behind. Big, that's a huge cake. The same thing works for, crap, I forgot another thing, it's really cool. For dry hopping, if you're going to dry hop in a bag or a stainless steel sleeve and put it in here, instead of opening the keg and digging your hand in there or doing whatever to get that stuff out, you can transfer to the other keg. Oak chipping, this oak stout I made, I did the same thing. Just throw the oak chips in when I was done. Instead of trying to fish them out, just rack over the other keg. Questions on that so far? Michelle?
Jason, do you ever adjust the length of your tube?
You mean the jumper tube?
No, the out tube.
The serving?
The dip tube in the
dip tube.
actual
that's in
keg
your-
itself?
in your keg.
Oh, inside. I don't, because I don't see a need to, but some people do. Some people want to cut this thing off here. Ooh, that's Feedback City. Now this guy sits way down in here. That yeast cake I was telling you about, is right in here. Some people do want to come up and cut that thing off shorter. For whatever reasons, I'm not sure if anybody else does that. Maybe to clear more space in the bottom.
The reason that I've heard to do it was to avoid that sediment that's on the bottom. So if you cut a little shorter, the tube is not sitting right on the bottom.
Yeah.
And so you're actually drawing from a little higher
A little
up in your
higher.
keg.
Yeah.
You can bend it too instead of actually cutting.
Yeah, you can do either one. I don't like any of that because I don't think you should modify your equipment to satisfy your lack of skill in how you're making your beer. In other words, you should have it pretty darn clear before it goes into the keg. And so then maybe just a little bit thereafter. Now some people, Gillette, did you ferment in the keg?
I have done some fermentation.
Some people ferment right in this thing. This is their primary fermenter. That sounded a great idea to me. You're just using one less vessel. I don't have any specific knowledge in that exact field. So something else about clearing beer. So racking beer from one place to the next can help it be more clear. Okay. The other thing is this keg setup lets you use a filter, which is really cheating, but it's the exact same setup. Notice this is just a jumper, beer to beer, and you have a filter in the middle. No, I didn't put a filter so you could actually see, but you put a filter in there. So sometimes on my Pilsners, if I can't get those suckers to clear, maybe they got some chill haze, you do this exact same thing. Just do it to show you since you don't believe me.
Brilliant idea.
So now let's pressurize that. That goes in there. See, that filled that up already. See, now it's going through there and on there.
Probably modify that as a hot pack too.
Absolutely. Good. Okay, see here, it's empty. So we've transferred all that.
Are you missing a filter?
Yes, I am. Demonstration purposes, gentlemen. Thanks for coming down.
Little late to the party.
So anyway, yeah, but the drawback to these things is you're going to lose about that much beer,
Yeah.
right? It's going to soak into that filter and you've kind of lost it. So I only use this as a last resort. But if you got a beer you're just not happy with, or it's too cloudy. I made an IPA one time, I dry hopped the heck out of it, and it was just so, and even after lagering it at 30 degrees for a week, it just would not drop out, so I ran it through the filter.
Jason, can I just say one thing? There is a much thinner paper filter version that you can get on Amazon.com. You'd lose a little bit less material for volume, but I don't know how much each of the pieces that you're putting in there and how many you might have to go through to process 5 gallons, because it's probably going to clog up a lot faster than this will. But it's another alternative, and you won't lose as much volume that way.
What he's asking is do this same concept only right out of your carboy into your keg. That way you have no exposure to oxygen whatsoever, because you're forcing CO2 into the carboy out a dip tube. I've seen the setup. Ted Househatter has it at his place in Baker City. I kind of watched and it was just a little too much. And just another aspect that I didn't think it really needed. But some people like him are just addicted to, oh my gosh, 1 molecule of oxygen is going to destroy this beer. So I do everything. But yeah, I can certainly do that. Yeah. For what?
Move it.
4 or 5 psi, whatever it takes.
Oh, out of the carboy. Yeah, I want to keep it low.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. For pressurizing the carboy, you want to keep it low because that is not a pressure vessel.
I can tell you how I do it. It'll blow the lid off before it'll blow the carboy, right? Which I've had happen. It's a hell of a noise, but it just blows it off the top.
Okay, so one other, we won't go into bottling, but one of the best things is you get to use a beer gun. Right? This is how you're filling your bottles now, is with the beer gun.
Is it carbon filter or paper filter?
You got one on lock, man. There's one coming this way.
I don't remember, to be honest.
It's paper.
It's a spun, what do they call it, melted spun or something like that. I buy the different, there's like a 5 micron and a 2 micron. Generally the 5 microns I get them at Home Depot. I mean, that's a very common. That apparatus I bought from a beer supply place. But the filters themselves is just a common everyday. Go to Home Depot. You can buy the cheapy little paper filters, but it's not going to filter out much. I mean, if you got some heavy hop residue, it will, but usually that stuff you can get to crash out when you get really cold. If you need to fine chill haze and stuff like that, you're usually going 5 micron or less for that. What it's actually made of, I'm not sure. So, beer gun. Not really going to describe how to use it, but once I got one of these and used it for the first time, I loved it, and I never went back to that other way. The only time I use this method of filling bottles is if I'm like coming to a meeting or something, because the setup of this can take a little while, whereas you saw how quick you can just hook this up to a picnic tap. All right, so carbonation. Carbonation can be a pain, but with a little bit of science and you know what's going on, it's really quite simple. Carbonation is just dissolving carbon dioxide into the beer. Now, you home brewers, you all know that. That's pretty simple, right? What gets brewers is the 2 factors that influence how much carbonation and how quickly it happens. And that is the pressure and the temperature of the liquid. Okay? Those 2 things are all you really need to take control of. So, for example, I've got my chart. I printed these out last time, but you can all find them online if you just Google it. Your carbonation chart. All this is a chart that gives temperature on one side and pressure on this way. And it will tell you to what volume you're going to be carbonating. I guess I should have defined volume first. So if you've seen beers, they'll say carbonate this to 3 volumes. Well, what's a volume, right? Well, again, you can Google it. It's just a unit of measure for how much carbon dioxide is dissolved into the beer. I can tell you generally 2.5 to 3 volumes is about what you're looking for. The actual number of volumes isn't so important for this demonstration. But for example, this chart, I mean, I know you can't read it, but see there's a million little numbers on here, and they all have to do with just say, if your beer is at 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and you pressurize it to 17 psi, you're going to get 2.6 volumes. Simple as that.
How about time? How does that vary?
Time is the big variable, and here's why. You're trying to dissolve a gas into a liquid. So in this corny keg, the surface area is just the top of this liquid, right? It's just this big around. So it's that surface area right there. And you're putting CO2 to it. And so to get that gas to dissolve in there, that's actually the slowest way to do it. It's just to put this on pressure and walk away. Now, it certainly will work. It might take several days, maybe a week to get it just where you want it. And that's because that's not a lot of surface area. So for that CO2 to get in here and then work its way down and saturate this whole thing to that pressure, take quite a while. If you can increase that surface area, you will drastically increase how quickly the CO2 dissolves into that. Number of ways of doing that. Number one way, shaking the keg. Rock and shake that keg. What that does is it splashes around inside there and creates more surface area for those CO2 molecules to dissolve. Sounds kind of silly, but this is exactly how you do it. In fact, I'm going to do it for heck. This is not how the commercial brewers do it. You don't see them rocking their fermenters, but the concept is the same. So we're going to put the gas to this. Okay, so now that little gas tube is the short one, right? So it's up high, up above the beer. If you lay this dude down like this, side, that guy down, you hear that? Okay, so just that will carbonate this thing faster, and I haven't even rocked it yet. And it's because that tube is going into the liquid and then having to bubble up through the beer. It's creating just a little bit more surface area. You start doing this, rock it with your foot, hear it? Sped up again. That's the CO2 bubbling into the solution. No, it's pressurizing. See, there was no pressure when we started. This is set to 20 psi. But see, notice how, listen, it's almost stopped. And then if I shake it, spit back up again. You say, well, why is that? There's 20 psi the whole time. I haven't changed anything. I've sped up how quickly that's going in there because of the agitation. So you could sit here and do this. 10 minutes.
How much time does that save doing that as opposed to just leaving it?
It can speed it up by days.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. So if the keg's on its side, I'm putting the CO2 line down here. So the beer level's way up here, right? So it's just bubbling up like that. That's what it's doing. That's all. Yeah, I've done it before. When I'm in a rush, and I'm like, I don't have time to sit here and do this, or I've got multiple ones. I'll let that dude sit there just like that. No. But shaking it's
20 pounds.
shaking is what's doing it. 20 pounds at about 45 degrees will get me roughly where you need to be. So you would adjust the pressure and temperature based on the type of beer you're making. So if you want a super carbonated beer, obviously you'd go a little higher pressure. That part just takes trial and error and using your chart to find out where you're at. Now, you can also speed it up if you're like most home brewers, you don't plan ahead. The meeting is tonight, right? And you just racked it. And you're like, I've got 2 hours. How am I going to make this happen? Well, I've got it set at 20 psi, but I can crank that thing up to 50 if I want. You're more than welcome to do it. In fact, I guarantee you will do it at one point. And so the danger of that is, though, you're going to over-carbonate it because you don't know when to stop. You know, to test the carbonation on this is difficult. You'd have to undo this, let all the pressure back out so it doesn't geyser on you, then try it, see what you think. It's a pain. So some people have a system and they say, nope, 50 psi for 5 minutes, I'm shaking it, I'm golden. Well, not really. But that can get you, closer to where you need to be as far as pressures. You cannot over-carbonate unless your pressures are too high or your temperatures are too low. So there's no difference. All you're doing is speeding it up. Okay? So the shaking thing and the making more surface area, another method of carbonating. I don't do it because I usually plan ahead enough. You can use a stone. And this is how the professional brewers do it. They actually inject the CO2 into here, and it comes out this stone, just like an oxygenation, you know what I mean, stone. When you, O2 stone. And it works in the same way. It's breaking that CO2 up into as small of bubbles as possible that then readily dissolve into your beer. So this setup I've only used once, and it made me a little nervous. It's just a dip tube. In fact, I think this one's been cut off. I think this one, somebody cut that dude off. Yeah, I did, right there. So there you go. So I cut it off so that this sits in the bottom of the keg, just so that it gets to the bottom, like that. And then I put my gas on my beer line and force it down in there. What I didn't like about that is this seal. This, I always feel, see, I can pull that out. And so I'm worried about that at some point. I turn the pressure up too high and all of a sudden this thing just blows out the bottom and I would never know what happened. So, but anyway, using a stone is definitely a way to speed up. I don't know a lot of brewers that...
What about just blowing CO2 through the gas, through the dip tube without the stone?
You could do that. It's either that or lay it on its side. You'll achieve the same effect. If, in the refrigerator, obviously it fits better when standing upright. You can certainly do that. I can tell you, putting the gas on the beer line, it'll go, but if you watch, it's...
But couldn't you put the black adapter onto the onto
Yes,
that red
if you wanted to just switch this out and put a black one on here, absolutely.
Just get quick release.
Yeah, like that. That's what I did right there on this guy, so I can hook it up to my beer gun. Yeah. You'll come up with all kinds of little problem-solving stuff like that. Okay, any questions or discussion on that part that we've done? Understanding carbonation?
Yeah, I think I heard you say something like, you carbonate it till you feel it's just right. I mean, if we're really being scientific about it, and you're going for a volume, and you don't want to trust your own judgment on what's just right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do we do? Are you
there are gauges.
Setting it up for a week, for 10 days?
If you're going to let it sit by itself, just like this without agitation, I'm going to say give it a week.
Whether it's agitation or not, I'm just saying.
How do you know when it's done?
When do you really know when it's done? I mean, if
You don't.
the recipe calls for 3 volumes,
Yeah.
how do I achieve 3 volumes?
How do you know it's there?
And I know that I've got 3 volumes.
Yeah. The only way you would really know, Don, is to buy a gauge. They make, the professional breweries have these gauges. They're like $3 grand. That's why none of us use it. Because they need to carbonate it fast and know that it's consistent. I can tell you this, though. There's a lot of fudge room. In other words, if your recipe calls for 3 and you want it to be 3, I guarantee you won't be able to tell the difference between 2.9 and 3.1. You won't be able to tell the difference. There's not that much.
The chart kind of gives you the idea of
Yeah.
how long and what
It doesn't say how long. That's the variable that he's. But yeah, temperature and pressure, yes. But Don, you will never actually know because there's no way to tell except for. But
I often use 30 pounds, and I'll do it in 2 or 3 days, and I'll get pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm high or low, and it's just coming over the
Yeah,
or
and taste it and feel how it is in your mouth. Yeah.
A lot of times people are carbonating in the vessel that they're serving in another keg at a higher temperature.
Absolutely. That's the other variable here is temperature. Absolutely. And that's how, when I need to rush, I'm putting it in my lagering fridge to get that out. So what he's talking about, that concept, is basically just like a can of beer. One of them's in the fridge, one of them's in the hot sun. They've been carbonated exactly the same, right? But you open the hot one, what happens? It just blows out. That's because that carbon dioxide is coming out of solution. Well, so the reverse is true. When you're trying to force it back in, it goes in cold solution much, much easier and faster. So I have tried, in fact, it was 2 weeks ago at this event. I knew one of my beers was a little undercarbonated, and I needed to get that thing carbonated. Well, I was on the drive up to Puyallup in the truck. It's hot. What am I going to do? So I knew, in fact, I was even off my chart when I was looking at temperatures, because this is meant for refrigerator. It only goes up to 65 degrees. Well, my beer's like at 70. Oh, crap. But anyway, yeah, so it's difficult to do that, to try to carbonate at higher temperatures. So lower those temperatures.
So Jason, quick question. You're saying it'd be better to refrigerate after you transfer before you start carbonating. Get the temperature down some.
You could, but I just do it all at the same time.
Yes. Okay.
Get it transferred, throw it in the fridge.
Yep.
My fridge has a hole that lets this line go through and just hit the gas right then. And then, yeah, at first it's not going to absorb much, but then you got a head start on it.
Okay.
If you're talking about eating it slowly,
Yeah, exactly.
is there a variable on trying to get micro bubbles versus some beer that's foams up?
The big. I think there is, but I have no scientific data to back that up. And the reason I say that is because I've carbonated beers for 3 or 4 days, and I know they're fully carbonated exactly like I want them. But then I tried that exact same beer a week later, and the gas hasn't been on it. I've taken this off. It's just been sitting there. And it always seems, this is my technical term, it seems like it's just a smoother carbonation, meaning less like Coca-Cola, like a soda that's really effervescent and kind of stings a little bit from the carbonic bite. And so I always wonder, does that mean that that stuff in solution is actually getting smaller? That's just my guess. That part is, can't really answer. I thought there was one other thing we were going to talk about. Oh yeah, they're talking about CO2 in solution. This is why when they talk about global warming and they say, oh my God, it's 2 degrees warmer, the oceans are warming up. I mean, it's 1.5 degrees warmer over the last 50 years. That's just a number I pulled out of my butt. Well, that's why it's a big deal, because the carbon dioxide that's dissolved in the ocean, as it warms up, it comes out. And all that carbon dioxide goes up. So that's why just a few degrees temperature can make a big difference. And the oceans are an example of that. The colder it is, they hold more oxygen. For example, that's why like our Oregon coasts, you notice you ever go out on a boat at the Oregon coasts, it's green, but you go to the Bahamas and it's blue or clear. It's because of that. More carbon dioxide dissolved in there, more animals live on that, more of that.
What about the Rio diving? Platform diving.
I have no comeback for that, sorry. Okay, I think I've got everything. Oh, nitro. You've heard of beers on nitrogen, and that's all they're doing. They're carbonating it with nitrogen instead of carbon dioxide. That's a much smaller bubble. That's why it gives it that little foam. Now, it's not 100% nitrogen, but it's a bigger percentage.
I don't know if this is the last time I saw on YouTube, some guy carbonated with helium.
Wax oil.
Yeah.
They just dubbed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I'm not saying you couldn't.
Well, yeah.
You can force a gas into a liquid, but it's not going to make you talk funny.
What about serving pressure versus full pressure in your?
There we go. That was going to be kind of the next thing, is foaming. The next thing you'll notice, you get this thing going just right, and either you hook it up to a jockey box, or most people, they get this little thing, they have their little party going, and they get it hooked up, and they're like, all right, come have a beer. And they hit that thing, and get like this much, and it foams all over. Well, so there's a few things going on there. This generally is going to be at 20 psi to carbonate. I mean, just ballpark. But if you push it out of here at 20 psi, it's way too fast because it's going to shove it out and agitate it and foam up. Now, there's two things that affect that. It's coming out of there too fast. So you can just lower the pressure, a serving pressure, like you said. So you turn your gas down, vent it out a little bit so that the actual pressure is that, and you move it out nice and slow. The other thing is, like on my system at home, I don't have to do any of that because you can do the same thing by just making this hose longer. You can make it 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet long. That increases the surface friction of dispensing the beer. And why would you want to do that? Well, so that you don't have to adjust your pressure all the time. It's always the same. Now, Stein bars can help you calculate that. They know these numbers off the top of their head. Right off the bat, they'll just say, well, what's your elevation, what's your temperature, blah, 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 and they'll say, you need a 7-foot hose, or whatever. And they'll get it just right for you. So that's usually, if you're over foaming, if you're foaming too much, usually serving too fast, or something's warm, maybe the keg is cold, but this beer line is warm, or your tap handle's warm, it takes a little while to run it, something like that. You know, a temperature difference can do that. There's multiple things. And you'll mess, or you've overcarbonated it. You know, you didn't realize your gauge was messed up, or you put it at 30 psi instead of 20 and left it there. Now it's just a good part about any mess ups with carbonating in a keg is that you can fix them. If you've overcarbonated it, all you do, just open this vent, vent all that gas out of there, and let it sit that way. And then try it again the next day and see if it's where you want. Now it's a hassle, but that's what you get for messing up, right? You'll learn to do it right the first time. But you can definitely adjust and go back and forth. Just do it all at the same time. If you want as fast as possible, get the gas on it immediately. Yeah, it's not going to dissolve much at 70, but you're going to put it in that fridge, right? So as that temperature comes down, it's going to start absorbing. I get it on the gas immediately. Really close.
Can I clarify, you serve at 20 psi?
On my system at home, yes, because I have everything set up. There's another little trick. Sometimes if you have several kegs in your fridge, in your kegerator, and each one of them has an 8-foot hose so that you get the proper length, that's a lot of spaghetti going on, right? I mean, so there's another little trick, and there are these little devices. If you want to know exactly how to get them, just email me, I'll tell you. They're actually an insert that go into this out tube. So here's your out tube. That dude just happens to, not that one. That's why I cut this one off, because it's not right. Anyway, this dude fits in there. And so on my system, I slide 2 of these in there. All that does is the exact same thing as adding a bunch of footage of this. It increases the resistance. It just slows everything down. It plugs it down a little bit. It's a plastic. Yeah. They're kind of flimsy. They'll break on you. I bought a box of 12 or something like that. So that's the only reason you'd use that, is to just eliminate such long tubes. The times those come back and bite me, though, is when I have those in my kegs, and then I bring them to somebody else's box, and they're all serving at the same temperature, or at the same pressure, except mine. So now mine's going to pour a lot slower, because they don't have that. So that can be kind of a thing. But when I'm serving at home,
This is flat.
does it flatten it?
Yeah.
The beer?
That's what it does with a long tube. Does it make the beer flatter?
No, it doesn't. No, because you're not changing the CO2 in the liquid. It's just slowing down and it takes more pressure to push that out. Think of a garden hose at your house. If you hooked up a garden hose and it was only 5 feet long, and you had a sprayer on the end, and you go, psh, see how far it went? And then you grabbed an 80-foot hose with the exact same setup and had that. It's not going to spray very far, is it? It's because of all that friction it takes to push that much water through that hose. That's exactly the same thing that's going on here. And those little inserts I have, they just slow that down. They're just little restrictions. They slow it down. But because it's all still pressure, see, a lot of people think, well, this is going to make it foam because there's turbulence. Well, it's all still under pressure. It's all still under pressure. So it's not coming out and then hitting this and blowing out everywhere. It's just slowing everything down.
Why wouldn't you just lower the pressure? The short ones?
You certainly could. The issue then is every time you want to drink a glass of beer, you can't just go whoop, and fill your thing. You have to go, oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Disconnect the gas. Vent it down. If it's at 20 psi,
Well, once
you got to get it down to 12.
once you carbonated it, it's carbonated. So you can bring it down after that.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Okay.
getting.
But, okay, yeah, and you're correct. So you lower it down to serving pressure. So now, up in this head space is now, let's say, 12 psi, serving pressure. So what's going to happen if this is at 20 psi and this is at 12? Slowly over time, it's going to start losing carbonation. It's going to start coming out of solution. And so your first few beers will be fine. Or if you're going to drink it all in one day, you'll be fine. I don't drink my whole keg in a day. If you let it sit for day after day after day, then, yeah, I used to. If you let it sit day after day, it's going to slowly go flat because your pressure up here is lower. So it's like taking a beer and open it up and letting it just sit there. So to avoid all of that, to where you never have to worry,
Where did that carbonation go? I don't think it could go anywhere.
because as you drink this beer, the level's going to be down here, and then it's going to be down here, and now you've got this much volume for this to go up into. See, so it was up to here, and as you drink it, it goes down here, and where's it going to go to? It's going to go up into that. So it'll find an equilibrium. So let's say this is at 20 psi, and you change the pressure to 12, and then you drink it down to here. Well, this up here is at 12 psi. This is at 20. It's going to find its equilibrium. So then it's going to go down to, I don't know, 16. So it will slowly go flat.
The extreme that I've had is we've had a full one, we had it at 30, 35, and then we forgot to do the pressure gauge. Put it on 12, beer will go into your CO2 because of the equilibrium.
Right.
Yes. Now that's, if you haven't done it, good for you. That's why these little setups that you buy, at first, this in here is a check valve right there, so that beer can't go the wrong way. And when I first went to Steinbart's, and I'm like, I don't need all this setup, this is expensive, just give me the gas and all. Well, that's why. If you mess up and push it the wrong way, you'll push beer up here, and the worst part is you'll push it up into your regulator, and now you've just bottomed your regulator. Yeah. So, yeah, you are hoosed. Okay.
Are your little plastic inserts for your two reusable? Or
No. They fit in almost everything.
can you reuse them multiple times?
Oh, reusable. I'm sorry, they said reusable. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just soak them in cleanser and sanitize them. Something else, just real quick. You know, the closer Will stands, the less time I have, is what that comes down to. Is your CO2 tank setup. Now, I made this little box here so it'll stand up on its own because it'll tip over. This is very top heavy. And when it falls over, it'll smack these gauges, and it only takes once, and then now you're buying a new gauge. So, other questions or things I've missed or what do Don?
I've been doing this now for a while, and CO2 system at home. The trouble I have is just getting random leaks out of the
Yeah.
I mean, I use a little soap. Sometimes I can't chase it down.
You get a CO2 leak.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
It's the leak,
Yeah.
pressure issues.
Yeah. What I
I
do,
don't want to change those rings every time I open it. So
Yeah. well, there must be something going on because usually I don't have to replace rings for a very long time. I mean, I go like a year. And usually it's the big one that goes bad. At that point, I usually just replace them all.
Right, you get
But-
a kit, you put them all in there. And
Yeah.
do that with each.
If you're leaking somewhere, are you finding a common place that it's always leaking at when you find it?
Are you using keg lube?
There you go.
Kit.
Yeah.
Because that solved it for me.
Keg lube can make a big difference.
Every time after I finish washing a keg, cleaning a keg, I just put a little keg lube around all those gaskets, and that's pretty much eliminated.
So I think just using it on the fittings. You actually.
No, I
Smear it on the actual. Yeah.
on the big O-ring. When I'm cleaning this, take out the poppets, put it around the poppets.
That O-ring right there.
That O-ring, yeah. The
That's
gas
sealing
O-ring.
up against the keg.
Helps hold the pressure.
It does.
You
Yeah.
can fill gaps and stuff.
Alright, good.
So one thing I forgot to mention too is with these, that O-ring seal right there, right? That means that metal right there is touching your beer on both sides. Especially the gas side is important. Here's why. You put this on there, that could be full of all kinds of nasties, right? Say it's on the gas side. And then you put on the gas side and you pressurize it, where does that go? Right into your beer. So it's important to sanitize these. Anytime I go to use my stuff, I keep a bottle of sanitizer, and I just fill that dude up like that, give it a little thing, squirt that a few times, and sanitize it. So as far as kegging, that area needs to be clean. Keep that clean. Oh yeah, yeah. Every time I empty one, I take them all apart. So. Okay, done. We done?
Any other questions? Nice hand for Jason.